Hello and welcome to Latika Takes, a podcast with me, Latika Berg. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. This episode comes to you from the Delphi Economic Forum in Greece. Now in its 11th year, this forum attracts quite the geopolitical crowd. It's my third Delphi and my first time back since Donald Trump's election or re-election. Last year I was on the Prime Minister's media plane covering the Australian election campaign. And what a sea change. I did not appreciate how much the Greeks were in with MAGA and vice versa, but it seems Greece, led by centre-right Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, is one of Europe's quieter MAGA whisperers. Speaking at this conference were a bunch of MAGA identities, including Steve Bannon, who spoke via a Breitbart moderator virtually. This episode, I wanted to speak to someone in the MAGA orbit, someone who knows Europe and also knows Trump world, to try and understand the thinking behind what has been a perplexing, to put it mildly, and often hurtful time as a US ally, both in the Indo-Pacific and in the UK/Europe. This episode's guest is the woman to do just that, Carla Sands. She served as Trump's ambassador to Denmark during the first administration, and you may have seen her on your television screens defending the president to the hilt, especially over the threat to take over Greenland, which is administered by NATO ally Denmark. If you're expecting a live television style ding-dong, maybe hang up the headphones now. As you know, this podcast is not a boxing ring. It's a place to try and actually hear each other, even when the disagreements or distance may seem so vast, it's insurmountable. I'm pleased to say Carla did not bring her boxing gloves. We sat down for exactly the style of conversation I was planning, in the only space available at the very crammed Amalia Hotel in Delphi, a crowded corridor near the staff's quarters. So please excuse the noise. But let me know what you think of our conversation. You know how to get in touch with me. Also, please feel free to rate and review this podcast and share it. I'd appreciate that. Now to the interview. Carla Sands, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Latika.
Why are you a MAGA Republican as opposed to any other sort of Republican?
Well, Latika, I'm a Republican, and I've supported Republican candidates all my life, even as a schoolgirl. And in my opinion, President Donald Trump is the best Republican president and leader that I think our country has ever had.
We'll get to some of those reasons, but how did you come into the Republican Party? Were you always Republican growing up? Was your family a Republican?
They were not political, but they were Republican and conservative Christian. And my grandmother, who was my dearest person in the world while she was living, always voted Republican and said that her town was all Republican. But when Bill Clinton was running for the presidency, I asked her who she voted for, and she said Bill Clinton. And I said, Nana, how could you? And she said, because he's cute.
There is a lot of that in politics. It sometimes does pay to be good looking.
There is. Look at Gavin Newsom, AOC. These are, very attractive people, and it's part of their brand.
And so how do you find MAGA? What does MAGA mean to you?
I think that brand is something that sort of center-left has grabbed onto, because I just think these people are common sense Republicans. They saw the country club Republicans behave in a way that's arrogant, that shipped jobs and manufacturing offshore, and that hollowed out our towns and our middle class, so that our middle class, even some of the doctors, feel like they're just hanging on financially. They're not getting ahead like they were when I was a young person. So in the post-war years, meaning post-World War II years, America was booming, and people's incomes, one wage earner could support a family, own a home, own a car, own a TV, take the family on a vacation, educate the kids. And
the American dream, right?
The American dream. And the average worker, even working in a factory, could achieve that dream. And it was a very cohesive society, and families were tight, divorce was low, children were raised by a mom and a dad. And I think that the country was thriving. And then we went off course a little bit and began to ship the jobs away. We got a president like Jimmy Carter, a weak president, And with weak US presidents comes the rise of despots around the world. And we saw the Iranian mullahs overthrow the Shah and take our hostages, our US embassy employees, and hold them for over a year. And they weren't released until President Ronald Reagan was sworn in. And so the fact is, the world needs a strong, virtuous US president. And you could say, well, Donald Trump's not virtuous, his policies are. So I don't look at the man, and we are all flawed, all of us, whether we're followers or leaders, sinners and saints all. But his policies are the best in my country's history, I think.
Do you think starting a war in Iran was virtuous?
Well, I don't think he started a war in Iran. The mullahs and the IRGC started that war 47 years ago. And every day from the podium and the pulpit, they would say, "Death to America." They started that war. And every US president since has said, "We will not let Iran get a nuclear weapon. We will not let Iran get a nuclear weapon." But they all punted. And in fact, in one Republican president's White House, when I was being briefed, I asked them when they said they had the bunker buster bombs and the capability to take out these early efforts by the Iranian regime to create a nuclear bomb. I said, well, are you going to take this capability out, the enrichment? And they said, no, we're going to leave it for the next team. And that showed the fecklessness on both sides of the aisle of letting this very dangerous and evil, right? Evil, they abuse their own people, regime to let them hold the world hostage with a nuclear weapon or a long-range missile, which could threaten the United States. They have real capabilities and already have those medium-range missiles. And so President Trump took them on, even though it's not politically a good time or popular. He seems every single time to do the right thing, not the politically expedient thing. And I really respect that.
But we were told last year that Operation Midnight Hammer obliterated the nuclear enrichment capability. And indeed, your own national security strategy said this in November. So why was it necessary to go now, given all the disruption economically this is causing us?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, they were still working on rebuilding their enrichment. You could see it in the satellite maps that they were hard at it. They were not deterred. And secondly, they have all of these launchers that they hide up in the mountains. They have capabilities that are going to be, it's like whack-a-mole, very hard to take out. So
he didn't obliterate it.
He obliterated the immediate threat. And let's not forget, there's messaging for public consumption and there's messaging for private consumption. And that message is that he is one man leading a country saying to the opposition, and that's the mullahs and the IRGC, we're coming after you and you cannot threaten the civilized world.
How did you meet President Trump? Because he made you an ambassador. Did you have a long relationship with him before he became the president?
No, when I was watching the polls in 2016, all these different candidates that were loved by the donor class kept popping up and they looked very interesting. But if you looked at who the people wanted, and I mean the working people, it was Donald Trump. There was no question. I would look at, there used to be a popular website called Drudge Report that was a conservative leaning site. It's no longer conservative. But at that time, he would put up a poll of who won the debates. And every time it would be Donald Trump at 85%, and everybody else was single digits. And I remember saying to friends, I think this Donald Trump, I think he's got it. And people would say to me, you can't be serious. And I would say, you need to get ready for a Donald Trump presidency. And he's talked about all the issues he's dealing with today for decades. I mean, he was talking about Carg Island in 1988. So he is someone who's watched these issues, who understands the geopolitics of all these issues, and he has a firm grasp on everything. Plus, he's a successful businessman, so he understands how to negotiate, which most U.S. presidents are political animals. They wouldn't be able to negotiate a better deal on anything because that's not what they do.
So at what point in your path or career do you go from supporting Trump to meeting Trump and then being appointed by Trump?
Yeah, so I met him and I helped fundraise for his campaign, for his candidacy, introduced him to people that are now working for him. And because I had smart people that I was doing business deals with say, you need to take a look at him, you need to meet him, and you need to take him seriously. And I did. because I trusted these guys. They knew what they were talking about. And so ultimately, I supported him. And I was proud to do so because he is a great communicator, maybe the best communicator our country has ever had. I mean, Abraham Lincoln wrote some beautiful speeches, but President Trump understands communication in the 21st century. He's really mastered it, and he has an amazing team backing him up. So I would say his marketing and media is really meeting the moment.
Does that include open the effing straight and an entire civilization could be wiped out?
Well, let's not forget what I mentioned earlier. Some communication is for the public and some is for the private. In this case, he's messaging straight to the despots in the IRGC that are literally mowing down citizens of Iran, the patriots that are trying to have freedom. And in fact, I'll just also share, just a few days ago, I was with some of those patriots, and they're the National Council of Resistance of Iran. They want a democratic, non-nuclear republic in Iran. They want elected leaders there with equality of religion and the sexes, whether it's in employment or marriage and divorce or voting rights. And they want to have a constitution, and they have a 10-point plan, and it's very Jeffersonian. So it's very much like America's founding and the ideas of what they want to see in Iran. So there are good people working on the ground in Iran to create a good and I would say beneficial government.
And so when President Trump said about allied troops that they fought a bit back off the front lines in Afghanistan, who was that designed for, public or private consumption? And what was the point of that?
You know, you have to look at President Trump as a macro guy. He's looking at the whole world. And at the time, I felt bad for the Danish troops who had a higher per capita loss than the US, the UK troops. We had a lot of good friends that were there in Afghanistan and in Iraq that lost their lives, that were right there fighting side by side, but not the majority. The majority of the NATO allies have carve outs, they have caveats. They won't fight. They'll do support, they'll do a little of this, a little of that, they'll do some logistics. So I would say that our NATO alliance, I don't think it looks the same going forward after what's just happened with their refusal to help us out with the Hormuz Strait and getting that open, the refusal to allow us to use their airspace. Our allies closed their airspace and disallowed us in some cases to use our own bases on their soil that we pay for, and we support troops to defend their right to sovereignty against foreign adversaries. So the fact that the NATO allies behaved the way they did, I think it changes NATO forever. And we'll probably be looking at the Middle Eastern allies, at Japan more, the AUKUS area too, and maybe less at Western Europe. I think Eastern Europe, they are still, on the whole, great NATO allies, but countries have to have capabilities and they have to be friendly. They're becoming adversarial and unfriendly. And half the time, the U.S. is led by a Republican president. It's not just Trump. They did the same under Bush, under Reagan, very adversarial, critical, there's a hatred of center-right leadership in the U.S. by some European countries, and that just it cannot stand. I mean, the U.S. doesn't do that to other allied countries when there's an opposition leader. We work with whoever's in power because that's the people's choice. We live in democracies. That's how it's supposed to be. But I think that when he said that, he does not know individual countries. He is looking at the macro. I understand the individual countries and how they felt very wounded by his words, but he doesn't know the details. But he does know the big picture that most NATO allies were not standing with us. They were unwilling to fight shoulder to shoulder with us like some of these other great allies.
He was actually talking, though, in that instance about Britain, where I live, and I'm also a citizen there. And the British casualties were enormous. I mean, you've seen these pictures of the coffins with the Union Jacks. And let me tell you, when the Afghanistan war was happening, I was a very young political reporter in Canberra. And when these guys started dying, they were fighting. They weren't doing support. They weren't carving out. They were dying. It was a national day of mourning. Per capita, it was huge for our country to have this sacrifice. And I hear what you say about Trump maybe not knowing all the detail, but that doesn't make it okay.
No, so I understand what you're saying, and it's a shame that he isn't aware of it, but at the same time, it's because he's looking at the big picture. The majority of the NATO allies did not fight shoulder to shoulder with us. There were great allies like Denmark, like the UK that did, but most of them didn't. And all he knows are the top line numbers. Think about what he's dealing with. He's dealing with our economy, he's dealing with the intersocial issues in the United States, and then he's dealing with the world. So we have to look at the big picture, and the big picture is he's holding all these balls up and then he's juggling them all and keeping them all in the air because he's so successful on these issues. So I admire his ability to have a bandwidth for all of these issues because most US presidents, they can get one or two big things done in a year. He's getting a year done with his team every week. I can't keep up with how many successes they're having. And so we can nitpick here and there, but the fact is he is winning, and we wish that our allies would be supportive and do some of the same things that he's doing for their countries. I'll just go to the UK since you talked about the UK. The UK, we at AFPI, where I'm chair for foreign policy, we talk about, yes, America first is great, but our allies should have a nation first agenda. Like if your prime minister would put your citizens first, secure your borders, control the immigration, make sure you have sensible energy policy so the energy costs are low, so businesses can thrive, so that homeowners can heat or flat owners can heat their home in the winter, so that you protect your rule of law, you protect your beautiful unique culture. All these things are important, and if they're not done, then we lose the sovereignty of nations. Then we have a globalist blob, which no one will fight and die for the globe. They fight and die for their kinsmen and kinswomen, the people of their country, for the pride of their nation, the flag. All of these things are important. And right now, the supranational, the globalist organizations, the transnational organizations, are attempting to implement a globalist agenda. They're still hard at it, even if there's a move by the US to secure nationhood. In some other countries, I see Poland and Hungary, some of the other Eastern European countries, some South American countries that are really beginning to embrace that nation first agenda. It has to happen in order to, I would say, save Western civilization.
So the US, of course, is very free to give Europe friendly advice. And I think it definitely goes back the other way. We've seen that over decades too. But at what point do you think it crosses into interference? Because it's very clear MAGA wants to see lookalike movements in Europe. And do you not draw a connection between that, the comments we were talking about before with Afghanistan, and this reluctance from Europe to get involved and help you out in Iran? Do you think maybe the approaches and methods of MAGA, however virtuous you might think your policy objectives are, could be a bit counterproductive to achieving those?
Respectfully, I disagree. And I really think that these are overt asks. We're openly extending our hand and saying, please work with us. Let's build up our economies together. Let's protect our civilizations. Let's protect our Christian heritage, because it's why the foundation of why our civilization is the most beneficial in the history of the world, has brought billions of people out of poverty, has given us a lifestyle that kings around the world could not have dreamed of just 100, 150 years ago. But on the other hand, the European countries are trying to export their policies to the United States and the rest of the world. Just look at how they're trying to starve Africa of baseload power and push them into a green utopia, and not letting Africa have their own industrial revolution. Look at how they're trying Europe out of Brussels, trying to censor American speech and American companies, what they can allow on their platforms. All of this is unacceptable to Republicans and many Democrats as well. So Europe is in not always overtly, but often in a way of subterfuge, trying to control the United States and the globe. Look at the rules on green, how you have to use certain fuels to fly the plane into European airspace. All of these things trying to regulate American businesses by regulations put into the EU, and that the EU writ large tries to globalize.
Yeah, I think overregulation is something most Europeans can see as being a problem for them,
It's killing Europe.
whether it's
You're
ideological
dying.
or
Most
not.
of the countries' economies are not going well.
You talked before about NATO not being the same. Is NATO even alive now, do you think? You were a former ambassador to Denmark. We saw those incredible threats from President Trump to acquire Greenland in some way, perhaps even with military force. Denmark, of course, administers Greenland and is a NATO ally. Do you think that NATO and Article 5 still exists, i.e., would America come and help Europe out if Vladimir Putin were to test it?
2 years ago, I would have said yes, Article 5 is ironclad, even though many countries are in violation of Article 3, which is that every NATO ally has the ability to defend their own territory. Denmark has never been able to defend Greenland and has never attempted to develop Greenland. Greenland languishes like a welfare state on just enough to keep it going, but not enough to develop economically. Even when they've asked for help from Denmark, Denmark's turned them down unless the US puts the screws on Denmark and says, no, you should really do this. Denmark, really, the Danish taxpayers, they want very generous social welfare programs. And the Danish prime minister listens and delivers. That's what they want, and that's what the prime minister delivers. They have good leadership there. They put the Danish people first, there's no question. But so, in the meantime, Greenland languishes. So Greenland's not part of NATO, it's not part of the EU. It's semi-autonomous. They want to be independent. The EU is now really investing a lot more than they ever have into Greenland. Part of that, I think, is to counter President Trump in the United States. But what's going to happen is Greenland will go independent in this century, just like Iceland went independent in the last century from Denmark. And when it does, it's going to have a big friend to defend it. There are only two countries that can really defend and develop Greenland. It's China or the US. So I'd like the US to win in this war.
So on Article 5, you don't think it's ironclad anymore?
Oh, so, I think with Spain closing their airspace, with countries saying you can't use your own air bases, the UK has not behaved like a close ally with a special relationship. And the fact that most of these Western European allies, they don't have the ability to defend their own territory. I know that they're spending more with NATO, but a lot of it is going into transportation and it's going into pensions. And are they trained? Do they have enough military personnel on the ground? Do they have the equipment? Is it actually working and not just in the shop or needs refurbished? And do they have equipment for the 21st century? I will say, if you look at the NATO report cards, and every country gets one, most of them are not delivering what is needed and asked for by NATO. And they said no when President Trump asked them to help open the strait. Remember, he opened it. And as soon as he opened it, then we had like 5 feckless leaders from Western Europe say, oh, now we're going to go keep Hormuz Strait open. Like, what? It was so cringy. I couldn't believe my eyes. If you're not going to go in when it's a fight, just be quiet and don't say anything at all. Much better than to, jump around like, I don't know. I don't want to say derogatory things, so I won't comment. You can just look at the photos and see the videos. But I don't think that our allies are showing that they're actually going to be there for us. And so I think we need to be more strategic, considering that we're countering China. Russia's a troublemaker, but China's a threat. A huge military and their economic might, and it's an asymmetrical war. They are at war in every way but kinetically with the West every day.
Yeah, I want to ask you a lot about China. But on that point, if you're saying the US is not there for Europe on Russia under Article 5, isn't that an incentive to Putin? And doesn't that make us all less safe?
Well, I would think it would be an incentive to European allies and Canada to maybe get their act together and actually maybe draft their young men, get them trained up. What's happened is our countries are so rich that the youth have become lazy and indolent, and they'd rather watch TikTok videos than go and slay dragons. The young men of countries that succeed, those men want to go slay dragons. And we need to bring out the dragon slayer in our young men, and we need to light a fire under them. If we don't, things will go very badly. We'll have civilizational collapse, and then those dragon slayers will start to rise, but it'll be from a decayed and destroyed civilization. So we better do it now from the top, encouraging. Otherwise, it will come up from the bottom. And after I'm gone, we'll have to have a civilizational rebirth because we need our strong young men that are going to fight for us and protect us. Right now, they don't want to work and they're lazy.
Do you think the MAGA movement would send American dragon slayers to defend Taiwan?
Well, I can't speak for the president, but I do know that we can never let China take Taiwan because it would destroy our economies. That's where our best chips are coming from. And our whole world now runs on chips. We're in a new world, an AI race world, a quantum computing race world, and the West must win. And it's as if Europe has decided to sit on the sidelines and not even participate.
So I thought, let me start with the good. I think there are two five-star policies that the Trump administration has done: Pax Silica and critical minerals. You're trying to build a strong, sensible coalition of countries that can hedge or balance or counter Chinese dominance on supply lines. Why doesn't Trump try and do that across the broad economy instead of all this bashing allies, berating allies? We could actually have been so much further along the track in together trying to counter China if we'd applied that approach to many more sectors in the economy. Where has the approach on China gone wrong in that sense?
Well, fundamentally, it's because our biggest companies across the globe want to do business in China and have turned a blind eye to the abuses and even encourage more investment. And I'm about to talk here at this conference about the World Bank and about our central banks. And the fact is, they're still doing loans to China. China benefits from these international institutions more than any other country, and they abuse the system where we have these sort of traditionally honest Western countries that just participate. China weaponizes every single institution and our courts, our laws, and they take advantage. So between the companies wanting access to the market share and investing and doing production in China because it's cheaper, and it's fundamentally the bottom line of why the American economy has not, well, the economy's done okay for the rich and the very poor, but the middle class, how do they lose their sort of wonderful life? It's because our politicians, our leaders, state and federal level, encourage businesses to ship those jobs away. It's greener not to make the production in the United States. It's greener, it's cleaner environment. And let's just ship those jobs because it's cheaper production. Meanwhile, who took it on the chin? It was the middle class. And that man that was going to the factory, that woman that was going to the factory and manufacturing. Now, today, that manufacturing is going to look different as President Trump brings the manufacturing back with his tariffs, which he got trillions of dollars of investment. Those investments are starting to come in, and we can see investments in energy production, investments in shipbuilding, investments across the board, all different kinds of heavy industries and steel making.
But those tariffs were ruled against. Don't you have to
Not
consider
all
paying them back?
countries, not all countries are going to ask for them back, and they'd be smart not to, because the trade imbalance has been so abusive. Tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers from European countries, but from other countries too. Now, there are some countries in places like South America that actually have a trade surplus with. We have a trade surplus.
Australia
with them.
too.
Yeah.
So I don't really understand why we got trade tariffs when you have a surplus with us.
So
and
I'm
we're a
not
friendly
sure.
country.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on the Australian tariffs, but I'll say that overall, the tariff and non-tariff barriers have been abusive to the United States. And when I would read the trade deals with China like 30, 40 years ago now that our politicians would do, I would see, because I was so upset that the trade deals were so beneficial to our adversary and so hurtful to American businesses and working class people.
Australia has been criticised by President Trump over Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. We sent a surveillance plane at the request of the Gulf, which I'm fairly sure is also working for the Americans there. I mean, what more do you want us to do for Iran? You didn't consult us. It's really difficult the way that President Trump behaves for political leaders to gather support for your military missions at home. And that's just a reality. It's not a criticism as such. It's just what these leaders are grappling with. Can I ask exactly what these model allies should be doing going forward to please America and ensure that we don't have these huge fractures in our alliances?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'm not an expert on Australia, but I do know Australia is starting to step up more. You're working on the submarines and you're working to, I would say, shore up your capabilities, and that's to the great. But, there's a lot of, Australia is really heavily involved with China And China has, if you look at the map of, used to be US was the biggest trade partner with Australia. Now
About
China,
a third of our economy is iron ore to China.
yeah. So China, and you guys are a great mining country. And so we think that it would be great for you to do more business with the Western allies than with China, who cheats and abuses in every which way. So,
And coerces. They coerced us
right.
during the pandemic.
And coerces. I mean, they threatened us that they wouldn't send the rare earth minerals we needed. They also threatened us they wouldn't send the pharmaceutical precursors, so we wouldn't have the drugs we needed for our people during a pandemic. And so this is not a friendly nation. This is a nation. We want to have a good relationship with China, but they have to act like a normal nation, not be gangsters.
Carla, you and I could both talk for another 30 minutes. This is a great conversation, but we both have to go. My final question, and I hope one day you'll come back and I can ask you even more questions. Who do you think can take the MAGA movement forward post Donald Trump?
That's a great question. And I think, I like to think it's the Republicans, because there are two major parties in the US. We don't have a parliamentary system. So it's the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats have become, the base is full on socialist. They want, Monami is the mayor of New York, and he's one of the heroes of the Democrat Party. He believes in taking the means of production, and he's attempting to control real estate in New York City. So that's the trend of that party. The other alternative is free markets. It's love of country, love of family, and I would say love of God. And so that's a little bit different than the Democrat opposition. Who can take that forward? I think it's really skipped a generation, and we can see the young leaders are people like J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio.
Well, Carla Sands, thank you for joining the podcast. I appreciate the time you've given, and I do hope you'll come back on.
Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Latika Takes with me, Latika Burke. You can find my work at latikambirk.com and this podcast where you find all your podcasts. See you next time.